Every time you've hesitated before speaking your truth, before quitting that job, before starting that passion project, it wasn't because you lacked the ability. It was because of how you might look. You were afraid of being judged, of stumbling, of being laughed at. You didn't want to be seen as naive, misguided, or delusional. So instead, you played it safe. You stayed quiet. You stuck with what was familiar, even when it made you miserable. But here's the dark irony. By doing everything in your power to avoid being the fool, you may have accidentally become something worse. Someone forgettable, someone stuck, someone who knows they're meant for more, but doesn't know how to begin. This video is going to show you why everything you've been taught about the fool is wrong. Why this character, the one we mock, dismiss, and overlook, is actually the most powerful figure in the entire psychological journey. You're going to discover why the fool is not the weakest person in the story, but the bravest. Why the fool isn't the one who fails, but the only one who dares to try. And by the end of this video, you'll understand how embracing your inner fool might be the key to finally starting the life you've been too afraid to live. But let me warn you, if you don't learn this, you'll keep living inside the lines someone else drew for you. You'll keep performing a version of yourself that feels safe but empty. And worst of all, you'll spend the rest of your life waiting for the right moment to begin, without realizing that moment never comes unless you step into it. So if you've ever felt stuck, if you've ever sensed that you were meant for something more but didn't know how to move forward, then keep watching. Because what I'm about to share might sound foolish at first, but it could end up being the wisest decision you ever make. You've heard of the fool before, but probably only in passing. Maybe you saw him in a storybook or a movie. Maybe you laughed at him, the jester, the comic relief, the idiot who didn't know any better. But that's only the mask. That's the surface. Because beneath that silly grin and clumsy behavior lies something far more profound, something ancient, misunderstood, and powerful. In mythology, the fool is always the one at the beginning of the story, not because he's wise, but because he's willing. Willing to take the first step when no one else will. Willing to move before he understands. He walks off cliffs, speaks uncomfortable truths, and dares to disrupt the order of things. Not out of arrogance, but out of curiosity, out of courage. Because deep down, the fool knows something the others have forgotten, that you don't need certainty to begin. You only need movement. The tarot deck, used not for fortune telling, but for reflecting the human journey, starts with one card above all others, the Fool, 0, the beginning and the end. A person standing on the edge of a cliff, eyes looking upward, a small bag on their back. It's a beautiful metaphor. They carry almost nothing. Not because they're careless, but because they haven't been burdened by the expectations, fears, and limitations that come with trying to be seen as smart or successful. The fool is pure potential, untouched, unshaped, and that's what makes him dangerous to the world around him. You see, the fool isn't stupid. He's free. He's not pretending to know everything. He's not putting on a performance. He's honest about not having it all figured out. And in that honesty, he can go places the rigid mind cannot. He can step into the unknown. He can fail without crumbling. He can laugh at himself and still move forward, while others remain frozen in the illusion of perfection. And maybe, just maybe, that's what you've been craving. A way out of the performance. A way out of the trap of always needing to appear like you have your life together. Because let's be honest, no one really does, but everyone is pretending. They're clinging to roles, to masks, to titles, They fear being seen without them, because being seen as the fool, that's terrifying. But what they don't understand, what most people never realize, is that the fool is the doorway. He's the necessary first step in every meaningful transformation. Every hero starts there. Every sage was once a wanderer. Every legend began as someone who risked looking ridiculous. So before we go any further, let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with this. Where in your life are you refusing to be the fool? Where have you chosen safety over growth? Where are you performing instead of becoming? Because once you spot those places, once you see the cage, you'll start to feel the tension between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And that's where real change begins. Not in having the answers, but in being brave enough to say, I don't know where this will lead, but I'm going anyway. And that is the path of the fool. Of course, all of this sounds beautiful in theory, romantic even. The idea of becoming the fool, of stepping boldly into the unknown and transforming your life. But when it comes down to it, something inside you resists. You hesitate, you retreat, you tell yourself the timing isn't right, that you'll do it later when things are more stable, more clear, more certain. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is fear. Not fear of death, not even fear of failure. It's something subtler, deeper. It's the fear of humiliation. Because at some point in your life, maybe in childhood, maybe in adolescence, you learned a dangerous lesson, that being wrong was shameful, that not knowing made you less, that standing out made you a target. And so, like most people, you adapted. You learned to read the room. You learned to say what was expected, to do what wouldn't get you laughed at. You crafted a mask, a version of yourself that would never be mistaken for the fool. And for a while, it worked. You avoided the spotlight. You didn't raise your hand when you weren't sure. You laughed at your own dreams before anyone else could. You became your own saboteur because if you could make the joke first, maybe it wouldn't sting so much when the world did. But what you didn't realize was the cost, because the moment you disowned the fool in yourself, you also disowned your creativity, your courage, your curiosity. You closed the door on risk, and with it, the possibility of real growth. You traded expansion for control, authenticity for approval, and now you feel it, in the restlessness, in the quiet frustration, in that sense that your life looks fine on the outside, but something's off, like you're living inside a character you no longer believe in, like you've muted your own instincts for so long you can't even hear them anymore. This is what happens when we exile the fool. We become careful, predictable, fragile. We mistake safety for wisdom, but it's not wisdom. It's fear wearing a suit, and society rewards it. Think about it. Our entire world is built to reward performance, obedience, predictability. We're told to follow the rules, to keep our heads down, to avoid mistakes at all costs. But do you know who never creates anything meaningful? The person who's afraid to look foolish. So when you hesitate to speak your truth, when you stop yourself from trying something new, when you shrink to fit in, understand this. It's not your fault. Your fear is learned, inherited, reinforced, but it is your responsibility. Because the longer you wait for the perfect moment, the moment where you'll finally feel ready, unafraid, respected, the more time you lose, and the deeper the mask grows into your skin. So I'll ask you again, but this time, more directly. What are you so afraid of? What's the worst that could happen if you looked foolish? You'd be judged. So what? You've already judged yourself. You'd make mistakes. Good. That's how you grow. You'd be seen. Yes, and maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Because if you can look directly at the thing you fear and walk toward it anyway, then you're not the fool at all. You're the beginning of something rare. But here's the part no one tells you. The fool is the most powerful figure in the entire story. Not because he's wise, not yet. Not because he's strong, not yet. But because he moves. When everyone else stands still, the fool takes a step. When the world waits for certainty, the fool acts on instinct. And in doing so, he crosses a line that most never dare to approach. The line between comfort and the unknown. Every journey begins with this crossing. Not with a plan, not with confidence, with a risk, a leap, a decision that doesn't make perfect sense. The fool walks out the front door with no guarantee of where the road leads. He's mocked, doubted, warned, but he goes anyway because he knows something that others have forgotten. Nothing changes until you do. Think about the heroes you admire, the people who broke the mold, the artists, the rebels, the leaders, the ones who created something new. Every single one of them began as a fool. They had an idea no one believed in. They started when they had no support. They were ridiculed, dismissed, underestimated, but they stepped forward. They made the first move, and that move changed everything. That's the fool's superpower. He acts without needing applause. He risks without needing a guarantee. He's not bound by the past because he doesn't pretend to have everything figured out. And because of that, he's the only one who's truly free. You, on the other hand, have probably been taught to wait until you're more confident, more certain, more qualified. But here's the secret. Confidence doesn't come first. Action does. You build courage by doing things that scare you, not by thinking about them. You gain clarity by walking the path, not by standing at the edge and overanalyzing every step. But there's a catch, and this is what most people miss. When you step into the fool's path, you will be uncomfortable. You will be uncertain. You might even be laughed at, but you will also be alive. You'll feel something awaken in you that's been silent for far too long. That spark, that quiet fire, that's what happens when you begin to reclaim your life. And that's what makes this so transformative. Because stepping into the role of the fool isn't about being reckless. It's about being honest. Honest about what you want. Honest about what you don't know. Honest about the fact that, despite everything you've been taught, you don't need permission to begin. So here's the truth. If you're waiting for the perfect time to start, you'll wait forever. But if you're willing to be the fool for just a moment, if you're willing to take that first imperfect step, then you've already done what most people never will. You've begun. And in that beginning, everything changes. But what happens when you don't step into the fool? What happens when you spend your whole life avoiding the unknown, the unpredictable, the uncomfortable? You may look composed. You may appear successful. You may even be admired for how well you've got it all together. But inside, there's a gnawing sense of emptiness, a quiet voice that says, "This isn't it." And the more you ignore it, the louder the silence becomes. Because here's the truth no one talks about. When you refuse to be the fool, you become the prisoner. You become a prisoner to your reputation, to the version of yourself that people expect. You begin to filter every decision through one paralyzing question. What will they think? And slowly, often so slowly you don't even notice, it stops being your life. It becomes a performance, a loop of safe choices and calculated appearances. You start living for approval rather than from purpose. And that has a cost, a deep, invisible cost. The cost of unlived potential, of things unsaid, of dreams deferred until they rot into regret. You tell yourself you're just being practical, realistic, sensible. But deep down, you know the truth. You're afraid, not of dying, but of being seen trying and failing. You're afraid of the laugh, the whisper, the look of disapproval. And so you shrink. You become hyper-aware of how you're perceived. You stop doing things that might make you look foolish. You only speak when you're sure. You only act when you're guaranteed success. You avoid risk like it's poison. And in doing so, you poison your own growth. Because nothing meaningful in life comes without risk. Love, article purpose, change. All of it demands a moment of vulnerability. A moment where you admit, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. And if you avoid that moment, if you spend your entire life trying to dodge that feeling, then you might never truly live. You might become someone who's always talking about someday. Someone who plays it so safe they leave no mark at all. That's the quiet danger of refusing the fool. You don't fall off a cliff. You just slowly fade into routines, into roles, into comfort that numbs rather than heals. And the world doesn't stop you. In fact, it rewards you. It calls you responsible, mature, successful even. But inside, you know what you gave up. You can feel it. That part of you that wanted to leap, but was talked down by fear. So let's be brutally honest for a second. What if the very thing you're avoiding, being seen as foolish, is the only thing that could make your life feel real again? What if the fear of looking stupid has been robbing you every day of the aliveness you crave? And what if, right now, you made a different choice? Because the cost of not being the fool isn't safety. It's stagnation, it's regret, and it's a life that never really begins. But here's the beautiful part. The fool never disappears. No matter how long you've ignored him, no matter how many years you've spent trying to appear competent, polished, and in control, he's still there, waiting, quietly, patiently, ready to re-enter your life the moment you stop pretending. Because the fool isn't a role you play. He's a part of your psyche, the spark that's still alive beneath the performance. And the moment you listen to him, the moment you stop asking for permission to begin, everything shifts. So what does it look like to embrace the fool now, in your life? Not as a symbol, but as a lived truth. It looks like finally doing the thing you've been talking yourself out of for years. The project you've shelved, the conversation you've avoided, the decision you've delayed because you were waiting to be ready or worthy or approved of. Spoiler, that moment won't come. Readiness is a lie. It's not something you feel, it's something you decide. It looks like allowing yourself to be bad at something again, to be new, to begin from zero, to return to that uncomfortable, uncertain, exhilarating place where the outcome is unknown, but your aliveness is undeniable. It looks like speaking up when your voice shakes, saying, I don't know, when you used to pretend you did, asking for help when your pride wants you to stay silent, laughing at yourself before anyone else can, and realizing that your worth was never tied to being flawless in the first place. It looks like risking misunderstanding, risking mockery, risking that someone, somewhere might raise an eyebrow or roll their eyes, and doing it anyway, not because you're careless, but because you finally understand that avoiding embarrassment is not the same as living well. Because here's what most people never realize. The moment you accept the fool, you free yourself from perfection, from performance, from the endless, exhausting task of trying to manage how the world sees you. You stop editing your life for the audience and start living it for yourself. And something strange happens. The more you allow yourself to look foolish, the more powerful you become. Not in the loud, aggressive way we're taught to define power, but in the quiet, unshakable sense that you're finally moving towards something real, toward you. And people notice, not because you're performing, but because you're not. There's a presence to someone who walks their path without apology, who knows they might fall, but walks anyway. That's the kind of person others follow, the kind of person others trust. Not the one with all the answers, but the one who dares. So ask yourself now, where could I let myself be the fool today? Not tomorrow, not someday, today. Because if you take that step, just one, then you've already broken the spell. You've already begun the return to your own life. And that is the beginning of everything. If you've made it this far, you already know. There's something inside you that's shifting, a quiet truth rising to the surface, one you've always suspected, but never fully allowed yourself to believe, that the fool is not the end of the journey, he's the beginning of wisdom. See, this is the paradox. The fool looks like the weakest character. He stumbles, he asks strange questions, he makes people uncomfortable, he gets laughed at, but he keeps going. And that's the secret. He persists. Not in blind arrogance, but in deeper and deeper surrender to the truth of his own path. He falls, yes, but each fall strips away something false, a layer of pride, a borrowed belief, an illusion of control. And underneath all of that, something unshakable begins to form. Not the brittle confidence of someone who always needs to be right, but the quiet certainty of someone who has dared to be wrong and lived. The fool who persists becomes wise, not because he sought wisdom, but because he stopped pretending. He stopped performing. He stopped controlling. He stopped needing to be seen as anything other than what he is. And in doing so, he becomes something else entirely. He becomes dangerous, not in the violent sense, but in the sense that he no longer plays by the rules of fear. You can't shame him. He's already been laughed at. You can't control him. He's already walked alone. You can't bribe him with approval. He's tasted the freedom of not needing it. That's the wise fool, the one who is brave enough to look foolish, again and again, until the world's opinions meant nothing, and his own truth meant everything. And now, it's your turn. You've reached the end of this video, but maybe the beginning of something much bigger. Not a new persona, not another mask to wear, but a homecoming to the part of you that's been quietly waiting, watching, hoping you'd finally hear its call. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need permission. You only need the courage to take the first foolish step, because on the other side of that step is everything you've been searching for. So go ahead, be the fool, and in time, watch what you become.